In this episode, I talked to Sage Canaday about training year round, how to keep getting improvements year after year, and how to take the training that we do year round and really focus it on specific goal events that we care about. We also talk about the things that we put out in the world, the effect that we have on other people, including negative impacts and positive impacts. All right, everybody. Today, it's my privilege to interview an elite mountain runner, someone who I've been learning from for well over a decade through his thousands of YouTube videos, someone who ran through my mom's backyard in Salt Lake City, and I saw him on Strava somehow. This person has had wins at some of the world's most competitive mountain runs, including setting course records at Speedgoat. And Sage Canaday, welcome to the Tracer Podcast, and thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited.
So let's talk about that run through my mom's backyard real quick. So I went for a run one time and somehow ended up in this gully behind my mom's house, just outside of, it's in the foothills of Salt Lake. And I came down this really awkward trail. It was like in the middle of nowhere. Like nobody ever goes on it. And finished my run, and I went to Strava and I looked at the segments that I had done, and it said Sage Canaday course record through my mom's backyard. So do you remember this strange run in the foothills of Salt Lake City?
Well, first of all, I don't really know where your mom lives exactly, but I do know kind of the area. It's the Cottonwood Canyons, right? You're coming down at the base of Snowbird.
No, this one's like well away from the Cottonwoods. This one's like just out of downtown Salt Lake to the north there on those dry hillsides.
Oh, okay. I don't know where that is exactly. I've been to Salt Lake a number of times over the years doing Speedgoat, like 5 times. And then also Sandy and I did a trip out there to scout out Speedgoat our first year. We were doing a road trip to Oregon from Colorado. So we were camping in there, and I was just running on random places all around the city. I also came to Salt Lake City for Outdoor Retailer one year, and we did like a treadmill challenge. And so I love sampling the different cuisines around town, and I love exploring town. So I don't remember that particular run, but I've definitely put down some Strava stuff on there. I put all my stuff on Strava, so every run that I do in training, pretty much, if I remember, it's on Strava, so it doesn't lie.
Awesome. Well, speaking of other segments in Salt Lake City or near Salt Lake City, there's this other segment called the Speedgoat 50K. And this is a 31-mile segment with about, 12,000 feet of vert. One of the most competitive races in the world when it comes to nasty, steep mountain running. And it's just a really hard race there's a few years there, I want to say somewhere in the 2015 era, where you were just on a tear on the Speedgoat 50K. And this is such a difficult race. I mean, if people are listening and they don't know the race, they should maybe go check out some videos. But it has the ability, even though it's just a 50K, it has the ability to really break people's spirits when they run it. Like, it is really challenging mentally and physically. It certainly was probably my worst race that I've ever had because I just, had a meltdown. I talked to your partner, Sandy, last podcast episode, and she had mentioned that, when I asked her what was the toughest race, there's the meltdown, what's the worst one you've ever had? Speedgoat was her answer. And like 9 out of 10 people that I talked to say Speedgoat was the hardest thing they've ever done. So let's talk a little bit about how you've had so much success in that race. Like what does it take? Give us an overview and a high level view of what does it take to get ready for Sage Canaday to get ready for Speedgoat?
Oh, so they have changed the course slightly over the years. I think the first year I did it was 2013, and it was like a mile shorter. And then in 2014, so I was lucky. I won that. That was my first year, and I won that year. Had a kind of a duel with Anton Krapicka, but it was my first big year in mountain running. And then 2014, it was like a mile longer, and it was like 32, 33 miles. And then even now, it's slightly changed, but it's still very challenging. You're high altitude. You got to be altitude trained is the first thing, and then big
Mm.
vertical, right? Like 12,000 feet, 11,000 feet of climbing. You're going up to Hidden Peak, the top of Snowbird ski resort. So that's like what, over 11,000 feet. And then you're going down. It could be hot. You could be crossing fields of snow. Carl, the race director, he makes it tough because you go off trails. Sometimes you're like just in the ski slopes, like in the loose gravel and rock and dirt. So for me, I think it's just little bit of luck, honestly. Like it's my style of racing, and I didn't know that till I started mountain running. Like I had no idea that uphills would be my strength, especially like runnable mountain uphills. But moving to Colorado that year helped me get up high in the mountains and altitude train, as well as run up steep gradients and ski slope access roads. So for me, it's about putting in the vertical, putting in the altitude training, being as fit as possible. And then I think just like, the 50K distance has always been a nice distance for me. I've had some big meltdowns in like 100-mile races. So I think I want to say shorter mountain races. It actually runs more like a 50-mile trail race in terms of time. But, I think that it's just suited my style, and it's just a really enjoyable race. I love the Salt Lake community too. And I love being on ski resorts. So it's a special race that I've done the most over the years. This will be my 6th time coming back to Speedgoat.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and you're doing it this year. So I forgot about that. That's going to be fun to watch you race. So going into your first Speed Goat, what were you doing in terms of racing? I mean, from what I understand about your background, you were doing like cross country races when you were younger, and frankly, running probably a lot faster in terms of pace on flatter, harder surface, or road running, basically. Is that correct? And how did that translate? Like, I imagine you probably had you're a very fast marathoner. What's your fastest marathon? I think it's like
Oh,
220,
216, 216,
216.
52. Yeah.
Yeah, so an incredible marathoner on the road. How does a 216 marathoner translate from being so fast on the roads to winning and even setting course records at Speedgoat? Do you feel like you really had to change your training to be successful at Speedgoat, or do you feel like there was carryover from that flatter running that really helped you? Because they are polar opposites, right? Like you can't get a race nastier and steeper and frankly slower for the terrain than probably Speedgoat, versus something that it can be as fast as possible, like a road flat marathon. How do the two interrelate in your mind?
Yeah, so I started running at a young age, like track, like flat, like the mile, and then I ran in college, and then I ran professionally on the roads for 3 years, doing half marathons and marathons. But we were running, 120, 140 miles a week, and putting in a lot of, we'll say, aerobic based zone 2 training. So your heart and lungs get set up really well. Like you have the capillary beds, you've got the blood flow, you've got the musculature to run do a long distance endurance event, whether it's riding a bike or doing ski mountaineering. The heart and lungs are trained very well. And so the biggest struggle was transitioning more of like the musculature in the legs, because your muscles are used to running flat and fast on a track or on a paved road through a city with no big hills. And then all of a sudden you have to power hike up a 30-40% grade ski slope or run down these crazy technical mountain trails. And I think some of that's a learned skill, and then some of that's kind of just a natural skill. I think I was always a better climber than I was going downhill. And then some of the downhills, it's like, how much risk are you willing to take with not
Mm-hmm.
twisting your ankle or injury? But it's moving to the mountains. When I kind of retired, I'll say retired from the roads, I still love road races. I just did a half marathon a couple weeks ago, but
Yeah. Yeah, it
uh,
did very well, by the way.
oh,
Second
thanks.
place at Cleveland, right?
Yeah. It wasn't my fastest time by any means, but I found the transition, it's all running in my mind. And even though
Mm-hmm.
ultra mountain running is very, very different, you got to be dialed with your nutrition. You got to have the technical skills. You're out there for, at me, over 5 hours at Speedgoat versus like 2 hours in a marathon. It's a big difference. And then you get into 100 milers and you're out there for like over a day. Uh, But I'd say
Mhm.
the musculature is probably the biggest one. And to develop that climbing musculature and descending musculature, you basically need to add a lot more vertical to your training. And you could kind of do a lot with high intensity hill reps, uphill and downhill, but then also long runs in the mountains and being altitude trained. And I think some people just, it comes faster than others. For me, there's always a transition period where I like, okay, you need to get into mountain shape now. It's going to take not just a matter of weeks, but months and months and months. But I always go back to that aerobic base I developed from doing flatter running at a young age, I think.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, I mean, to take away a conclusion from that, aerobic development, the stuff that happens in your metabolism and in your blood and in your heart and your lungs, and the stuff that really delivers those critical molecules to your muscles, that's something you really can't shortcut, right? Like, it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's something you've got to invest in for years. And that's something that I learned from my dad and also from Scott Johnston's book, Training for the Uphill Athlete, was just this idea that you really have to slow down at the beginning, especially in order to invest in yourself, to then be able to really tune up later. And that's totally congruent with what you're saying here, that the road stuff was all of your, yeah, that was your platform for getting out there and getting those miles in, and probably a fair amount of easy running in the early days. And it sounds like you learned how to do that at an early age. And then when you went to Speedgoat, yeah, there's definitely some muscular changes that need to happen, but those can happen over a few months, right? Like, you can really, so the takeaway would be, for all of us who want to do well, if we can train year round aerobically and just keep that base building, it will pay off year after year after year. And then as we get ready for different races, we kind of zoom into the specifics of the muscular system in those. Did I get that right, or is there anything you'd add or take away?
That sounds right to me. Yeah, it all goes back to aerobic development, and it's everyone talks about zone two training and taking your easy days easy. And the reason why that works is because it makes you more consistent, and it's really about putting in the consistent time on feet. And it's easier to do that when you're not having to strain too much. You could run with better form. You're not always exhausted all the time. The risk for getting overuse injury is a lot less because you're running controlled. You're doing zone two training. So if you're putting in the time, and you have to be patient. It takes months and months, if not years, to pay off.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like money in the bank. You're investing early, and if you're patient and you stay healthy, you stay consistent. That pays dividends down the road. And then when you sprinkle in some specific stuff or intensity, you could hold it better. You could peak better, and you could always have that foundation. So you're developing the musculature, you're developing the blood flow, oxygen delivery, metabolism with fat burning, and just being overall more efficient on any surface, any distance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's so in line with my own experience. I've talked about this before, but like, the first few years that I ran, I always just pushed it as hard as I could go. And I could only go 3 days a week because I was so blown up every time I went running. Right. And I finally learned to back off. And I wasn't getting anywhere, by the way. Like, I wasn't getting any faster. Then I started running a lot of easy, and you're right. Like, all of a sudden I was running 5 days a week and then 6 days a week. Right. And I wasn't feeling tired the next day. And I remember talking to some friends and just seeing and asking them, like, I don't understand how you guys run 5, 6 days a week. Like, that, it just doesn't equate in my mind. And now I totally get it, because once you back off, you're not as beat up, but you also build to the point where you're so much more resilient over those days that you run. So that's such a magic formula there. Um, awesome. So speaking of the muscular specifics, Speedgoat used to have like a variant of their race called the quad banger. I don't think they're still do. Are they still doing that? I think
Was
they.
that the downhill one?
That was the downhill where you rode the tram to the top, just smashed. I think it was 4 laps or something down, and then you ride back up. So it was just pure downhill running. Uh, maybe less important to have aerobic base and more important just to have quads of steel, right? Are they still doing this race? Do you know?
I actually don't know. I know they have like a 25K. So because
Hmm.
they're part of the UTMB series. But I know some of the years I did Speedgoat, like 2014, 2015, 2017. Well, a couple of the years in there, I know they had the quad banger because I remember watching people do it and knowing that they had to take the gondola up. But I never did it personally.
Yeah, yeah. I can't imagine the recovery after something like that. Wow. In your training, and I know this because I've talked to you a lot through Tracer. We've talked a lot about workouts. We've gone through a lot of data onboarding, let's call it, in Tracer. And one of your workouts, so you have this 50K program on Tracer, and one of these like cool workouts that I see pop up that just like it just looks so exotic. It's like the fruit at the grocery store that you don't buy it very often, but it's kind of like, ooh, I want to try that, right? Is this red one that we have in there called the up down repeats? Tell us, and the reason I just thought of that was because we're talking about seasoning our legs for something like in a very specific way. Tell us about like what a good up down workout is.
Yeah, we use them sparingly because we also, it reflects our training philosophy, Coach Shandy and I at Higher Running. So it's the Higher Running 50K program. But we sprinkle them in strategically, knowing like when your goal race is, because it's demanding, and it's kind of the idea that not only mainly train the uphills because I think there's more gains to be made on the uphills. You're climbing longer on the uphills. Most people, that's part of getting your mountain legs under you is learning how to climb. But you also have to learn how to go downhill, and you have to be
Mhm.
used to that, bombing down a mountain and not having your quads get too tired or cramp up or blow out, basically. So, it's we call this a transitional workout where you're doing a hard rep up for a number set of minutes, you're resting at the top, and then you're actually running down fairly fast. Not like totally out of control because you don't want to twist an ankle at a high speed, but it's enough that it calluses the legs, so to speak, to that transition. Because as you know, at Speedgoat, you go up, then you go down, you go up, then you go down. And so we don't want you to be in shock. And if you're just running uphill workouts on a treadmill all the time, that's not very specific to mountain running. You got to be able to transition at the top and then be able to go down.
Mhm.
And so to have that all in the same workout in the same couple minutes really is specific to the race, but it's also not. We don't do it a ton because the recovery is a bit longer, and so that's
Mhm.
why we focus generally our efforts on the short, high intensity hill repeat workouts or an all uphill, up tempo type of workout. But at the same time, you're also doing long runs that we say you need to go up and down on, and the long
Mhm.
runs should be kind of in the ratio that the climbing is for your race distance. So you could like scale back the Speedgoat 50K. If it has 10,000 feet of climbing, you go out and do half the distance. You're maybe trying to get 5,000 feet of climbing in. That's still a pretty long run, long run for most people, but you kind of get the idea.
Yeah, and do you like to put those like if you were to do a hard downhill workout, knowing that it's going to kind of blow a hole in your schedule a little bit, right? Uh, do you like to do those kind of naturally where maybe you've built up a few weeks and your mileage has come up and it's kind of time to back it off anyway, just to allow your body to absorb, a down week, if you will. Do you like to put those at the end of a block where you're naturally going to go into a down week, or not? Like, how do you think about it in terms of how it fits in terms of the week to week cycles that go on in training?
The up down usually falls kind of in the middle to the second half of the training. So we don't want to do it in your taper phase, obviously, and we don't do it at
Mm-hmm.
the very beginning. We want to callus the legs to doing some long runs up and down first, at slower speeds, and then knowing what it's like to climb and transition first. It doesn't necessarily coincide with like a lower mileage week, but it definitely, we try to have it so that there's no hard workouts right before and right after it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's usually our model is we have a lot of times we have 2 easy days before and after. Not always, but generally, like after that one, it's considered one of our hardest workouts. So we want to make sure you have ample time to recover from it. And it actually came from my idea of I used to run the Boston Marathon a lot, and when I trained for Boston specifically, if you've run Boston, the downhill in the first 5K is actually I don't want to say extreme, but for a road marathon, it's pretty extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And even the first 10 miles, the first 16K at Boston is a net downhill. And a lot of people just go out way too fast. They feel good. It's early on in the race. You're running fast downhill on this, negative, I don't know, 3% grade. Like it's not steep, but it's steep enough that you could run 20 seconds a mile faster in goal pace. And they get into trouble because the quad damage is so extreme after they get to, through the halfway point and they hit the real uphills and the Newton hills, their quads are like destroyed and you have no
Mm-hmm.
climbing power. So it's kind of the idea that I used to do downhill 800-meter repeats on a road to train for Boston. We kind of take that same concept and extend it up to ultra mountain trail running, where you're doing downhill repeats, but you're also transitioning and practicing going uphill. It's kind of like a triathlete doing block training, where you're jumping off the bike and you got to start running and your legs kind of feel like jello. That's kind of the goal of these types of workouts. You're going up, your legs get tired, you're going down, your legs, the contraction's different. So it's a good callousing effect of building leg strength and that musculature for those transitions in mountain races.
Yeah, I've also noticed with myself that's where cramps happen is when you transition, right? When you've been going uphill for a long time and suddenly you're going flat and then all of a sudden your calves seize up or something. Or vice versa. You're coming down and now you're going back up and something kind of it's like a system that's been offline for a long time suddenly needs resources and everything kind of panics around that. You mentioned not doing up down repeats in your taper period. So here's an embarrassing, funny story about me. There's this race in Salt Lake. It's no longer happening, but it's called the Wasatch Steeplechase. And I've talked about it in other podcasts, I think. And it's a steep race. It's 16 and a half miles. It's got about 4,000 feet of gain and descent, but it's pretty steep on the backside. Like you've got to drop a couple thousand feet in like a mile and a half or something. And it's so funny as a like total noob trail runner back in the day, I saw some video of Killian talking about his training and he just, was talking about how he's just trying to get as much vert as he could. And I guess there was some nuance there that I skimmed over, but the race week I was out, we were up in Park City, Utah, and I was out on the ski slopes just like slamming the downhills as hard as I could. And that was like 3 days before the race, maybe something like that, like the Wednesday before the Saturday. And I don't need to continue the story to tell you it was a pretty bad race. I did not do well. So yeah, it's funny what we don't know, right? Things seem obvious to me now. They haven't always been that way. So let's talk a little bit about, kind of wrapping up this training talk stuff. How much do you feel like maintaining your strength in a race like Speedgoat, or, say in a 100 miler, when I did a 100 miler last year, my quads blowing out were a major part of my slowdown during the last, I would say 15 miles, maybe last 20 miles. Like I really started to slow down on the downhills, partly because of blisters, but a lot of it because of my quads. What do you think about nutrition around like your hydration and your electrolytes and your overall glycogen stores? Does that affect your ability to keep your muscles intact?
Well, that's a good question. You're talking about muscle cramping in like shorter mountain races, and a lot of people I think always assume that their calves or their hamstrings are cramping up because they're like low on sodium, which could be the case, but a lot of times it has to do with what I call sheer muscle fatigue. So basically, you're pushing your body to do something that you didn't train for very well. So like people at the Boston Marathon never trained for a fast downhill, go out on downhill on pavement way too fast, quads cramp up early on in the race. I've had some of my worst muscle cramps in sub ultra mountain running races where I'm only like an hour in at Sierra Zinal, for example. You climb like 6,000 feet in the first 12 miles. It's ridiculous. And I think that's from sheer muscle failure. Now in a longer ultra where you're out there for 20 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours, maybe, you could definitely have some major issues with dehydration or major bonking with like you're so low on glycogen, your body's like shutting down because it's like you shouldn't be doing this because maybe you miscalculated what you ate at the aid station or something like that. So I think in the longer ultras, it seems to all kind of combine itself where it's hard to separate what's my limiting factor. It's usually not your VO2 max. It's usually not going to be lactic acid. Those are more for shorter distance things. But the sheer muscle failure, massive dehydration, low glycogen, low blood sugar, sleep deprivation, it's like your mind is trying to shut down because your body's kind of in shock. And that's why it's so mental, is like, can you turn off that switch where your brain is telling you, hey, my body's fatiguing, you should slow down or you should stop. I'm going to protest by making you feel bad, basically. Or if you could kind of like know, okay, this is normal. I don't think anyone finishing a 100-mile ultra is running the downhills very well in the last 15 miles. I mean, maybe, I don't know, Killian or Jim or someone, but like the vast majority of people out there, if you're holding it together through mile 70 or 80, you're actually doing pretty good. I felt really bad. Like I did TDS last year, which was like 94 miles and a lot of around the UTMB course. And I felt really bad at 30 miles in. But then, you could kind of change it around sometimes, but your mind plays tricks on you with what your body is feeling, I think. But you got to take care of yourself. You got to stay hydrated. You got to have a plan with nutrition, because that is a key part of the long ultras for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. How do you feel like, let's say that you're in peak Speedgoat form, right? Something shorter. And for you, that's just over 5 hours. For most people, it's like 10 hours. If you're pretty dang fast, you're coming in somewhere in the middle there, right? Elites are coming in under 6 hours. So let's say that you're in perfect Speedgoat 50K form. You're just, that 5 hour speed is there. How much is that correlated with, say, turning around and doing a 100-miler? I remember Killian had an amazing year one year, and we say that every year, right? The guy's amazing. But I remember he went to Mount Marathon and just blasted everybody at Mount Marathon. Then he went over to Colorado and set the record at the Hard Rock 100. Not long ago, maybe five to 10 years ago, somewhere in there. How much do you think like your success in something shorter, in say the 5 hour range, would translate to something a lot longer? Say Speedgoat to TDS. Do you have to train drastically different? And what's the correlation there? How does it carry over?
I think it's fairly similar. And with like Killian, I mean, it's hard to compare anyone against Killian. I think after that, he actually went to Cerezinal, which is that 20-mile mountain race, and like did really well there. And then he did well at UTMB or something ridiculous. He also does like vertical Ks, which are like 5Ks straight up a mountain with over 3,000 feet of climbing. But with him, it's all mountain running and mountain strength. So like whether you're doing a short race in the mountains or a long race in the mountains, I think for him, it might be a little bit different compared to like the normal person, because he's always training in the mountains, right? He was putting in these 20-mile or 20-hour training weeks where he's doing maybe 30-hour training weeks where he's, training on skis all winter. He's racking vertical. So he has such a big base that for him to sharpen up and then do a short race, he could then transition back and he's automatically doing 50K, 30-mile long runs in the mountains. So I think for Killian, it's easier to go back and forth. Whereas I think for like a more normal person, we'll say, Speedgoat 50K might be the longest you've ever run at first. Mm-hmm. But I think as you gain more experience, as you have a bigger base, you could do really well at the shorter distance races. So for example, a lot of people we've coached over the years, they'll do like an ultra marathon. They'll train for it. They'll run consistently high mileage. They'll put in the time. They'll do well in their ultra marathon. It could be a 50K. It could be even 100 miles. And then relatively short transition later, we give them time to recover and train a bit, but they'll PR at like a 5K or like a half marathon or like some road event because they got in such good shape. They got in such a big aerobic base. All they needed was several months to recover and sharpen up, and then they were able to run fast and flat. So I think it kind of goes back to that principle. In my personal experience, that probably hasn't been as much the case because I was so dialed at the road marathon. I have to like focus for like 6 months at a time to get that speed back. But I think for most people, it goes back to this is an aerobic based event. I put in consistent training. Now I could PR at any service, any distance. But there's definitely some specifics and other variables for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, back to that idea of always be base training, right? And when it's time to race, take that base training and sharpen it up for the specifics of it. But whether you're a biker, a runner, a backcountry skier, there's all kinds of ways to keep your aerobic base developing because it is about the muscles, of course, because there's soft twitch and fast twitch and the density of mitochondria in our muscles. But we can develop in different ways, right? And Killian skis all winter. Some people may ride their bikes. Some people may cross country ski. Doesn't matter. Keep that always going, and then tune it up for what you need to do for your race in the last few months of your cycles. I want to take a quick moment and tell you about a product that I think will help you nail your next marathon or ultra marathon. To do well in these events, you have to train correctly. You have to know how to build your endurance, how to build your strength, how to build your speed, your economy. And it's not always obvious how to do that. So what better way to train than to receive daily workout recommendations from people who are winning these races? These are the pros that have been there and done that and have dedicated their lives to understanding how to make the most of your training. That's what Tracer is. Tracer is a new system that brings adaptive, personalized workout recommendations to you through a mobile and web app on a daily basis for a fraction of the cost of traditional one-on-one coaching. So check that out. You can see more. You can learn more about how that works at tracerfitness.com. There's a free 14-day trial, so there's really no risk. You can go in there and play around with the system and decide if it's for you. I personally have used Tracer for preparing for a 50-miler last year, my first 100-miler this last fall, and recently a ski mountaineering race. And in all three of those events, I exceeded the goals that I had for myself and did extremely well. So check it out, tracerfitness.com. So you mentioned kind of those early races you had against, I think Max King was in one of those races. I remember seeing on your YouTube channel actually a video of you and Max King, and Max had like a mullet. Shout out to Max King's mullet on that video. Go check it out. And Anton was there. And I love those videos from like that era of maybe 2010 to 2015, not just your videos, but like videos in like trail running videos in that era were kind of grainy and shaky. Like we were using camera phones that were not very well established, right? They weren't very good yet. And nobody had stabilization and nobody was really editing that much. They were kind of just putting like a cool music track over it. So it has this like really nostalgic feeling when you go watch a trail running video from say 2012 or 2013, somewhere in there. Like nowadays, I wonder if things are so over calculated, like just on the internet, where we've learned so much about our psychology and we know what hooks people, right? Like, and when I say we, it's not you and me, I just mean humans. Like our society has learned, what's kind of the bubble gum out there, right? That just gets people's attention, clickbait, if you will. And so it gets a lot of views, but it also kind of leaves us all a little unsatisfied because it's like an endless stream, like where you're looking for that depth and you never quite get it. So maybe that's what kind of keeps you just kind of flipping your thumb to the next video, doom scrolling and I do it as much as anybody. Like, what do you think makes a great YouTube video? Because you've been doing this for a long time since that epic, right? Like since that era, you've been doing YouTube videos from when it used to be grainy phones and just doing minimal editing, all the way up to where you now have thousands of videos on your YouTube channel, VO2 Max Productions. Check it out. And I've been watching that channel for well over 10 years now. What makes, in Sage Canaday's mind, what makes a really great video to watch online?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, I still have this pretty old iPhone here. It's like 5 years old. I'd say, it's constantly changing, and it's constantly changing with the camera technology, but then also with different social media platforms outside of YouTube, right? The rise of Instagram, especially, and TikTok, and short form content, vertically filmed video. You could do that as a YouTube short now, but there's more content out there. So the competition is fierce. The music choice becomes more important. The thumbnail preview becomes more important. Back when I started my YouTube channel, I was in college, and this was like circa like 2007 probably. So even before I started mountain running in 2012, I was making like track videos and road running videos just for fun. But yeah, they were quite grainy. And now that benchmark's changed. Everyone's got, if you have a new iPhone, you have a very high powered camera. You could film in 4K at a high frame rate. You have stabilization technology. Now, even the GoPros, you don't even have to have the GoPro on a stabilizer. The GoPros, it's built in. The iPhone, it's built in. You could run with the phone and get a stable shot. Drone technology has become amazing. And there's an expectation that, if you're covering a race and doing like a pro race film, you're competing with like professional film guys. I have a good friend who's actually is a professional film guy, and it's like, well, can you film me? Because I don't want to do a POV holding the camera in this race. But I think it goes back to what resonates with you and what you're passionate about. And for me, it was always just having fun making the type of videos that I want to make. It obviously helps with the sponsors to get a bigger following and to get more engagement always, but at the same time, I'm not going to do videos that I don't thoroughly enjoy doing, because my channel is it's like your personal brand and an extension of that. And if you're having fun doing it, then it doesn't feel like too much work either. So I kind of like that idea. But you're right. It's constantly changing. And I feel like I always have to constantly be adapting. But it's kind of like your physical run training too. You're always trying to new things or a new race distance or some new challenge, and it keeps you on your toes and it keeps life interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of having fun with your videos, I went on your YouTube channel yesterday, okay, in preparation for this discussion. And I just went to your video list and I just started scrolling backwards. And it took me a long time because, you have to go down like 20 videos and then it loads. So I just kept loading and loading and loading, and it just kept going. And it was like 5 years ago. And then I'd scroll, and then it'd be like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And I got all the way back to the original number one first ever video, the Nipple Tips infomercial. So, of course, I watched it. And, maybe we'll find a way to edit this in so that, our viewers can watch this right now. So if, maybe not, we'll clip it in here. But it's this funny video of you, like it's an infomercial and it's a joke. And you're saying like, why do anything else other than put these, like, you had these like aluminum foil, tips that you were putting over your nipples. Hilarious. I loved it. At the time that you made that, you were clearly just messing around, right? Um, did you know what you were starting when you put out the original Nipple Tips infomercial?
Not really. Yeah, I was in college when I did that one, and that was the first video on VO2 Max Productions. I had another channel under a different name where I had other videos, but that was my
Okay.
first big one, I think. And yeah, it was meant to be funny, and I sprinkle in my attempts at comedy over the years too. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's super grainy. Like I don't even know what I shot that with. We had like a giant camcorder with like the VHS tapes, and like it was not edited well. I think it was my own music soundtrack on this like 1980s keyboard that my grandma gave me.
Okay.
Or maybe it was I had this electric guitar in college, like this super cheap electric guitars, flimsy guitar where I'm like, da, 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 and I'm just like playing a chord progression. But yeah, the nipple tips were a joke video, and I don't think it got a lot of views initially. I think more of the coaching talks and like actual action videos got a lot of views. And it wasn't until I actually graduated college and I was sponsored to be a pro road runner in this Olympic development group when I really got some traction. I was filming workouts of back then it was Des Davila, but Des Linden, who ended up
Mm,
winning the Boston Marathon and making the
yep.
Olympics. But she was already like a professional road runner, and I had filmed some workouts of her at Hanson's Brooks, and that's when I probably really decided that I'd go like all in on YouTube, because I was like, wow, this is a great platform. I love social media. Like back then, I loved Facebook because it was social media, and then YouTube. I found YouTube, and I was like, wow, this is great because I love making videos. I was that little kid carrying the camcorder around on family vacations growing up. I always love videos. I'm not an expert editor. I don't know what I'm doing really, but I love the creative aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And what a takeaway right there, right? I'm just going to highlight this takeaway. Don't be so busy in your life that you can't go make a nipple tips infomercial, right? Like, don't shut yourself down around what's serious to do and what's not, right? Like, we get in this mindset that like, oh, I don't have time for any messing around. And oftentimes it's like when you're just like kind of experimenting and having fun and just doing something you want to do, it leads to this like huge opportunity. Because I imagine your YouTube channel has like 250,000 people that follow it, right? And that's a huge amount of people. Like, I'm a big Utah football fan, okay? When I go to a Utah football game and it's filled to the brim at the stadium with people screaming down at the football players, there's 65,000 people there max, right? And you're talking almost 10, like you're talking 5 times that or just under 4 or 5 times that. And that is a huge amount of people who, if you put out a video, it's going to, go out to them. And that's probably a huge opportunity for you in your life and has been. And it happened because you were willing to mess around in the beginning. So I just wanted to highlight that takeaway. Like, that's something that we all can learn from, right? Like, go do the silly stuff, be willing to do something non-professionally, right? Yeah, what a cool story. What are, like, tell us on the YouTube theme here, tell us like some of your favorite channels. Like, refer us to some channels here. The Sage Canaday top recommendations for, like, I love this YouTube channel, and it can be non-running related if you want. Maybe a couple, maybe one that's running related that you really like, and then another one that's just like something totally off the beaten path.
Yeah, so it's I know you're a musician, so I get inspired by just like watching musical covers and stuff a lot. So I like find music. I've always liked the format of music videos, but specifically like kind of in the outdoor sports space, I really enjoy like what Mediocre Amateur's been doing.
Mm,
Those guys, the Skimo
they're
Adventures,
from
because
Utah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they travel around the world doing a lot of times they're skiing up mountains. They do some trail running stuff, but
Yeah.
they'll do a lot of that stuff. So learning as a beginner skier, it's inspiring to see that scenery and outdoor adventure. And when I originally got into like training talks and coaching things, I'm also very passionate about coaching because it's a way to help people. And
Mm-hmm.
I found that that informative angle has been a big core competency of my YouTube channel over the years too. I'll still do the funny music dance videos and musical intros and
Mm-hmm.
infomercials, but the training talks I think are useful. And I found that if I'm trying to learn something, whether it's changing the oil in my car or something, I'll go to YouTube and I'll look up instruction. And some videos are horrible, but a lot of videos are really good. So it's like how to use Photoshop, how to do this, and so
Mm-hmm.
I really like all the how-to videos across any sort of hobby or lifestyle thing you have to learn. I do have a good friend. I was mentioning my friend he was actually a film student at NYU, and he's a professional film guy, but he has a channel called Serious Runner, which is all kind
Mm.
of like satire comedy. It's more like road running related, but he's this character, and I make a lot of cameos. I've helped be in some of the scenes over the years with him.
I think I saw this on your soft rock videos when you guys were doing the soft rock loop, and you kept mentioning the serious runner, which is funny.
Yeah. His real name is Steven Ganoza, and he actually helped produce a film about my story over the last 3 years with like the fire and health issues I had. But
Oh, so he's the. Oh, I want to come back to that. I'll let you
okay.
finish, but let's come back to that.
Yeah, but in terms of YouTube, like he's we collaborate a lot, and I've actually been collaborating more recently with some road and track runners again who are much younger than me, but I like the energy there. So stay tuned for from collabs on that too.
Cool.
But yeah, just the scenery of previewing ultra races around the world is always great. But I'll be inspired by the big channels like a Mr. Beast or some comedy channel or something random like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I am also a fan of Mediocre Amateur. I'm subscribed. They are from Utah, although I've never met them. And I just love, like, even from the name, right? Like their brand is so amazing. Mediocre Amateur, and they're pretty good, right? These guys climb mountains and ski. Like they're good athletes, and they spend a lot of time in the mountains, and they've done a lot of really amazing things, traveling to Europe and climbing these peaks over there and everything. But I just love how, like, the whole point is we're not taking ourselves seriously, and our channel is called Mediocre. I would wear a Mediocre Amateur shirt, right? I'm never going to wear a Nike shirt or something like that. Like, I just don't resonate with like that kind of stuff, but like that kind of thing, that's for me. And I love their humor too, because they do just slide these jokes in. It's just part of their personality. They're just being themselves. They're having fun with their friends. They're talking about their gear. They're talking about their suffer fest that ended up being 10 hours when they were planning for 3. And it's a blast. So check out Mediocre Amateur, check out The Serious Runner, and of course, check out VO2 Max Productions. So you mentioned your friend who made the video of you. And I think I want to point this out to our listeners right now. The reason you and I are on this podcast right now together is because of that video. What happened was, I guess it was a year ago, like, I don't know, somewhere over the last year and a half, I was going to bed, and I have this habit where, like, when I'm getting ready for bed, I open up my phone and I watch YouTube until my eyes are like kind of fading, and then I turn it off and I fall asleep. And up pops this video about Sage, Canaday, and Sandy Nypaver. And I watch it, and I'm like, and it talks about some difficult things that we talked with Sandy about in our last podcast. So go check out, if you haven't already heard that, go check the podcast with Sandy from just the last episode, talking specifically about your apartment burning down, and then also your pulmonary embolism. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Which is a major. It's almost a heart attack, right? It's like it. From what I understand, it's like a blood clot that prevents blood from getting through into your lungs, and so it's like shuts down the blood flow in your lungs, which is pretty major.
Yeah, it's life threatening. So it was like a lot of blood clots in the vessels in your lungs. And well, yeah, what it would cause is if it's fatal, it usually causes heart failure or cardiac arrest, because your heart's under like a tremendous amount of pressure because everything's clogged up, and then you could also like barely breathe and get oxygen. So it's considered pretty urgent, life threatening type of thing. It's scary.
Yeah, it's not just a pain in your chest. Let's put it that way. And so I watched this video and see some of the stuff that you guys went through, kind of all in one gauntlet of time, right? And I remember just thinking, and at the time, Jason and I were building Tracer behind the scenes, like we hadn't shown anybody what we were doing, but we're building Tracer. And for those listening, Tracer's new coaching software that brings AI. It uses AI to bring the coaches' recommendations to people who subscribe to it. And so we're building this thing, and we're thinking like, hey, what coaches do we want to bring on here? We had Max King, And we were talking to some other ones trying to figure out who's going to be a good fit for this in the early days. And I just remember seeing this video of you guys. And part of the reason, and this may sound like I'm blowing smoke, but I'm not. We really want to build Tracer for a number of reasons. Number one is we think that it will benefit people who pay for it. Like we really do. But we also want the coaches to make more money and to have a better future and a better like ability to support themselves, because Jason and I have both benefited from like really good mentors and coaches in running. And we just think it's such an amazing service, but the nature of it is so unscalable. And so when I saw your video, I was like, these are people that I would love to financially benefit from this, because I was seeing this suffering you guys were going through. And it's not like you guys were, I wasn't like feeling a pity party for you guys, but I was like, dang, these guys are going through a lot. Like, I'm just going to reach out. And that night I sent you an email, like right from my phone, sitting in my bed. And I was like, hey, I just saw your video. I just want to tell you what we're building at Tracer and see if maybe there's a fit. And I think it was a few days later that you guys wrote back, and now here we are. So thank you to the Serious Runner, if you're listening, for doing that video. Like the power of publishing a story. It's like you don't even know. It's not just a video, right? Like it is a catalyst for relationships that have been created. Like that's what we're doing when we put stuff online. And it's not insignificant. It's a real, and your channel. And like, that's why I spent so much of this conversation asking you questions about YouTube, because these are, and if you put out really harmful content for people, we're poisoning our world. Right. And there's plenty of that. Like there is so much toxic stuff going on. And we could get into all the stuff that's probably really unhealthy. But then there's this whole other side that's just like, wow, something like YouTube is like changing conversations around the world. It's putting Sage and Joey are now talking and working on this thing called Tracer because some guy made a video, right? And I just think that's so cool. And you've been a part of that journey for, one of the OG YouTube channels in trail running. So cool. Let's go now to your pulmonary embolism. So like, tell us, like, you're sitting there eating breakfast. Like what happened when you were like, I can't breathe? Was it gradual? Just give us the play by play.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for reaching out. First of all, it's been a great journey together. And yeah, it was spring of, actually it was my 3-year anniversary on May 30th that I was hospitalized. But the problem with my pulmonary embolism, which I think was actually unique compared to most people that get this, first of all, it usually happens to people that are quite a bit older than I am. It usually happens to people that aren't athletes. I was not in a high risk category, and I had to look up what it was when I was in the hospital, and they told me that because I didn't know what it was. But yeah, initially it started off as this weird like back pain. So I just, I'm in my late 30s now. My back hurts sometimes after a hard training session. I thought maybe I tweaked it sleeping. But it was like, the back muscles, but down kind of low, like back probably where your kidneys are almost. So like lower back around the diaphragm area. And then also it would wrap around like through my rib cage and send out this kind of doll-like pain. But it wasn't excruciating. And so I remember those first couple of days, I was a little worried about going to the ER or the hospital because, I'm a self-employed entrepreneur. I'm an independent contractor. Yeah. Most of my sponsors, I pay for my own health insurance, and it's kind of a catastrophic. They call it a catastrophic health insurance plan. So if I go to the ER, I'm looking at quite a bit of like thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket, especially if you take an ambulance or something. But I was a little hesitant to do that. So I called some doctors and they had me checked out. And I guess this is a common misdiagnosis, but unfortunately they took some x-rays of my lungs and they're like, well, there's something going on. And they actually misdiagnosed it as pneumonia. But I've never had pneumonia before. So I'm like, well, it was kind of, by then it was starting to get kind of hard to breathe. And so my lungs feel heavy. It's kind of hard to breathe. I was on a break from running, unfortunately. So I wasn't running. And so they gave me antibiotics for like 10 days and I took them and nothing really happened. So I basically had this pulmonary embolism for what ended up being like 5 weeks. Whereas usually I think when people get it, they go to the ER within a couple of days, which is what you should go to the ER immediately if you have a pulmonary embolism, really, because you could get a heart attack at any time. Over those weeks, the blood flow was not getting to the tips of my lungs, especially like the lower lobes of my right lung, and the pain was starting to get up into my chest. And so it was getting pretty bad. Like I couldn't lie down to sleep at night. I like just the act of lying down on my back was too painful. So there were a couple nights I'd sit up. We had this little futon in our living room. Granted, we had a studio apartment, so it was one room, but I was sitting upright on the futon trying to sleep. And then eventually I was starting to try to run again because I was going to do some training. I was doing some film project work, and I absolutely couldn't run. Like I would go out the door in Boulder on a flat sidewalk or bike path, and I would try to run at my slowest running pace, which for me is 12-minute mile pace. I'm used to running like 7-minute mile pace is my zone 2. And I'm trying to run 12-minute mile pace. And I literally could not hold it for more than 60 seconds without feeling like I was going to pass out. Like carrying the groceries up a flight of stairs would leave me breathless and dizzy. And then I started coughing up blood, which I was like, this is kind of weird. That is a symptom of pneumonia, I guess, in some cases, but I had no idea that I was coughing up like blood clots. But it got to the point where when I was not able to run, I woke up one morning and my chest it felt like I was going to have a heart attack. Like I was like, I can't get through today without going to the ER. And that was when I went in, boom, 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 CT scan with contrast. They ran blood tests. D-dimer was through the roof. The CT scan, which is like it's like a bunch of x-rays basically, but it's way more detailed. It's more like an MRI. I'm probably saying this wrong, but like it's not something you would usually get, but they caught it instantly on that CT scan.
It has ionizing radiation, which means if you do it too much, it increase your risk of cancer because they actually have to blast the energy through to get that image, which can damage your DNA. So usually it's kind of it's not something that it's not a dental x-ray, right? Where they just come and do it. It's something they do carefully, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an IV injection with that radioactive dye, I guess.
Oh, okay, cool. Like with an isotope or something. Yeah.
I think so, but they could see how the blood flows through the vessels in your lungs. And so they could see where it was like plugged up, I guess.
Wow.
So it's like, I don't know how many, it's probably like getting hundreds of x-rays all at once in terms of radiation dose. And I've actually had several of those over the years, but anyway, they put me on blood thinners. They initially had to inject me in the stomach with blood thinners. And then I had to go overnight in the hospital, to monitor. And it was a big choice whether or not I should take the ambulance to the hospital. Cause I was in the Boulder ER and my insurance only paid for this hospital that was like 10 miles away in a suburb of Denver. And we were trying to figure out the cost of if I should go in the ambulance or not because of insurance things, which is ridiculous, but it came down to things like that. And I think Sandy ended up just driving me to the hospital because I was like, I'm going to go home and get a change of clothes. I've already had this pulmonary embolism for 5 weeks. Like what's another hour? Yeah. But I mean, I was lucky. I responded really fast to the blood thinners. I had to take them. I took the injections. I had to inject myself with them for like 10 days, but then I took pills for 3 months, which is the bare minimum. And they ran a bunch of tests. And basically the issue was that some of my lung tissue started dying over that period because it wasn't getting blood flow.
Getting blood. Yeah. I was going to say that doesn't recover overnight.
It doesn't. It's irreversible damage is what they said, actually. I could still feel it. Like it's like you get a side stitch that you get every time you run hard and it never goes away. I see. And I've had extensive tests where they're like, oh yeah, there's the scar tissue. Cause lung tissue is actually very, very sensitive. So like you don't want to mess around with it.
So, and I want to bring this other part of the story in here because I think it's relevant to what you're saying. You're going through all this just health wise. It's just a meltdown. You're probably like when it happened, I can imagine you saying, oh, do I have like overtraining syndrome or something like when in the early times Then you realize like, no, this is like life threatening serious. You go through all this stuff. In the meantime, 5 weeks have gone by while the edges of your lungs have like sealed shut in scar tissue, is like what I'm imagining. Like they're just gone, they're dried up. And then how much longer was it that your apartment burned down?
So the apartment fire. So we'll put it this way: my friend who was doing the film had already started filming because the story was going to just be about overcoming this health issue.
Okay.
And so he was actually one of the first people on the scene. He lived like a couple blocks down the road from us in downtown Boulder, but that was October. So I had just gotten off blood thinners. Like I was hospitalized at the very end of May 30th, 2021. I was on the blood thinners. I was trying to recover that summer. And so then it was October, I think, that the fire happened. And we happened to be away that night. We were actually in,
So
yeah, we were out of town.
a few months between.
Yeah, it was just a matter of months. So like, I'm paying medical bills. You got this financial stress, just trying to start running again. Got off the blood thinners that cost $250 a month out of pocket. And then we get the phone call and we look on the news because this fire happened at like 3 a.m. We were out of town. And my friend who was doing the film was the first one to let us know, actually, because he lived down the street. This is downtown Boulder, like concrete jungle. You'd never think, like, no wildfire danger ever. And, this apartment complex with 83 apartments in it, all small apartments, like studios or one bedrooms, just totally demolished, totally destroyed. Our neighbors, like, people had to jump off their balconies off the second floor. I actually had
that's what Sandy said a few weeks ago.
I had a climbing rope up there that just for that kind of thing, because you only had one exit out the door, and that's where the fire spread the most. But basically, all our belongings were totally destroyed. They didn't even let people go back through the rubble because, like, they found asbestos eventually, and it was bad. But we basically were reduced to like nothing in terms of material possessions. And then dealing with my health insurance bills and all that, the hospital bills, but then now dealing with insurance claims on, our condo insurance policy versus the HOA insurance policy. And we're actually still figuring that out after 3 years. So it was hard. But my friend he just started filming because he was like, the story just got more dramatic, I guess.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I'll also, I mean, we talked to Sandy. I talked to Sandy in the last episode, and it was also on the tail of her sister dying of cancer, which was a few years before or something, right?
So it was like a year before, and I'm obviously like that's the absolute worst. It's just horrible.
Yeah. So you got Sandy's sister dying, you got you having your own health issues. You got your apartment burning down. And then I don't think in the words of Jason Edwards, co-founder of Tracer, it's not rocket surgery to infer that as a pro runner, when your lungs get permanently damaged, you're probably sitting there saying to yourself, like, I don't know what I'm going to do going forward. Like I can imagine there was a huge, maybe let's call it an identity crisis potentially. I mean, I wouldn't be ashamed to admit that because so much of what you do is dependent on those lungs delivering oxygen. Turns out oxygen is a pretty big deal to our bodies, right? It is probably the most critical element even over water and food, right? You can't breathe for very long if you don't have oxygen. You won't last very long. So, and I remember this video that Solomon put out a few years ago, which is, we're going to have to make a nice like video link here at the end of this episode and put it in the description of this, because we've got your video with the Serious Runner. We got the other YouTube channels, and then maybe this one from Solomon. And it was about Anna Frost. And I don't know if you remember this video, but it was kind of at a point in her career where she realized she wasn't going to keep winning races all the time, right? Like she was kind of graduating, aging out, if you will. Like we all are going to get older, right? We all can't set records at Speedgoat for the rest of our lives. even Killian Jornet himself someday is going to stop whooping everybody in Zagama by 8 minutes, even though there's a bunch of 22-year-olds out there, right? So we're all on that track towards not winning, but this is kind of forced upon you, right? And I can imagine it was a huge identity crisis. Like, what good came out of it, though? Like, that's the question I have for you. Like, why are you a better person now than you were before all this stuff happened?
Well, that's a tough question. And you're right. Like that was the first question we asked the doctors was, how is this going to affect my running? And
Mm-hmm.
I think we're still asking that question to this day, but you're right. Also with the Anna Frost thing, like, as I get in my 30s, late 30s, and you get towards master's age, especially for someone who burned it so hot, so competitive, so young, that thought had already been weighing on me. Like, when am I going to retire? What does it mean to retire? But I think, the first good thing that came out of it is my friend Steven captured it in the film, Starting Over, which I hope I hope it could help people who might have symptoms of a pulmonary embolism catch it earlier, unlike me.
Mm.
I hope it could inspire people to overcome any sort of adversity in their life, no matter what level it is. Because, like, my doctor friend, who he's my newer doctor, he wasn't my doctor when I had these health issues, but my friend who's a doctor, he told me, he's like, none of us get through life unscathed, and I think that's a good motto to have. And I mean, hopefully, no one has to overcome horrible tragedy and adversity, but over the course of your life, like, there's gonna be some challenges. There might be a challenge where you hurt yourself during an ultra marathon, or you get in a car accident, or someone in your family passes away from cancer. Like, that's a very that happens in life. And I was really lucky. I think I didn't realize how lucky I was, how privileged I was growing up in a household where I was, I wasn't super rich financially, but my parents kind of spoiled me. Like, my dad was a public school teacher. It's not, we didn't make a lot of money, but they supported my running from day one. They filmed a lot of those early Speedgoat videos
Yeah.
because they were out crewing for me. And so,
I can
it's
hear your mom's voice right now
yeah,
yelling, "Go Sage." I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
actually can. I know her voice. Yeah.
yeah. And so, like, even through my 20s, like, college, there were some ups and downs in college, and there's ups and downs with your running career. But, like, I had so many lucky breaks, and I had so many positive and good things, and I still do. But I feel like when I got the pulmonary embolism, I was like, oh, like, this is the first real big challenge, at least for me personally, that I've had to overcome. I mean, other people have trauma as children or early on in life,
Yeah.
or they come from broken homes, or there's
Yeah.
people
The world's a
fighting
big place.
yeah, there's people fighting for clean drinking water and enough food every day.
Yeah.
So it kind of puts things in perspective, and it makes you, I guess the main thing is, it makes me appreciate life more. And I think I talk about this a little bit in the film. It's called Starting Over, by the way. It's on our Mutt Running YouTube channel. But I talk about it in the film, like, it really put things in a different perspective for me, having, somewhat of a near death life, like, your life flashes before your eyes, and you realize, like,
Mm.
oh, like, I shouldn't take all these things for granted. Didn't even know if I'd be able to run again at, like, any sort of level after that. And I'm still trying to get back to my competitive roots, but I also kind of have accepted that, what, you're getting older too. Like, you're not going to be smashing your PRs that you had when you were in your 20s necessarily. Like, I don't think I'll ever touch that 216 marathon again, even with super shoes now.
Mm.
But that's okay with me, because there's more important things in life, and it's still always about challenging yourself, no matter how old you are, and doing what you love, no matter what. And so I think hopefully it made me more sensitive to, like, other people's struggles, or realizing that, there's more to life than just competitive running. Because my VO2 max took a big hit. My max heart rate seemed to have dropped off a cliff. Uh, but yeah, I think just, yeah, having that appreciation for still being alive was a big key takeaway.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, congratulations on the resilience there to both you and Sandy. I think that's a theme between the interviews with her and with you, that yeah, the world big place. There's a lot of suffering out there, and you've experienced some, I've experienced some, we all have, and we have choices to make, right? And we have things that we have to acknowledge about our mortality, and it makes us better. And one of the things you pointed out was that other people can see your situation and potentially prevent a major, 5 weeks going by and things like, losing tissue, maybe catch it earlier. That when we suffer, if we're willing to share that we can kind of build a bridge across a chasm and hopefully not make people have to go all the way down to the bottom of it to get back out. So many great takeaways there. So to here's kind of a wrap up question for you. Going forward and acknowledging these things, and what's coming to mind is another video. I watch a lot of YouTube, by the way. But another video is coming to mind, and that's the one that just got published about Jim Walmsley, which is an awesome video, right? And he's had to battle through to get his wins too. He's willing to fail, right? But one of the things I thought was so cool about it was him describing his willingness to ski. And I know this is something that you've kind of taken up too. And I love skiing. I grew up skiing with my dad, and I was born and raised in the foothills of Utah. So like skiing is second nature to me at this point in my life. But I know like you've mentioned how you just started getting into backcountry skiing and ski mountaineering. You just got some new gear, and like you're still not completely comfortable on the downhills. And Jim did the same thing. And the thing I love about that is that here you guys are like some of the fastest people on earth, and you're still willing to go do something you suck at. You're still willing to go out there and be like, well, I'm not good yet, but I'm going to be a child in this situation. I'm going to be willing to put myself out there and do something that I'm not the best at, and even let somebody film me doing it or film myself doing it. And I just think that's such a cool quality for adults to have, people who are, well into the middle of their lives or something, to go pick up something new and be like, you know what, I'm going to try that. And yeah, I'm not going to do it very well. So going forward now, Sage Canaday, into your future, knowing that you're like, things have changed for you quite a bit with this health issue, but they were going to change no matter what. So what does your future look like? How do you envision yourself in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years from now? What are you going to be doing, and what are you going to care about?
Oh, hopefully still running as best I can, and still making videos and still being involved in helping coach and empower people to enjoy the sport. I mean, running will always be my main sport. A lot of times I call myself a mountain athlete, even though I suck at skiing. But it's, embracing the mountain culture, since I live in the middle of the mountains in Colorado now. Like, I look out my window and I see a bunch of 14,000 foot snow covered peaks right now. So I think, it's challenging yourself with things that could also help your running, because it makes you a more well-rounded person, and it's a good break mentally, but then also physically it's a good stimulus. And I think even with like Jim, looking at like Killian or Francois, Dane, those guys all do like the big skimo races, and you're just in the mountains moving, and it's good non-impact cross training when you think about gliding uphill, either, cross country skiing as well, and skinning uphill, but then enjoying the downhills, because it's just fun. It's fun for me. And I know, there's always an injury risk. There's risks with everything in life though, like whether you're in business or, starting something new. And I'm not afraid to be embarrassed, because it's, everyone's a beginner at some point in running and getting in shape, or, making videos on YouTube. So yeah, hopefully I could keep doing that. I think, as I get older, the competitive times obviously will probably start to slip. I'm going to try not to make them slip, but I'd like to still document the journey and still do a lot of being involved with coaching. And yeah, I want to do that as long as I can. I don't know if I could do it, but social media is always changing and things are always popping up. So I'm going to keep trying to do that for sure.
Awesome. And maybe that's a great kind of plug for Tracer. and I have no shame in plugging Tracer because I really believe in the value of what we're trying to put out there. So to me, it's not just like used cars salesman here trying to get you to buy something you really don't need. But the thing I love about what we're doing is you've clearly learned a lot over the course of a career of winning these races, and people can use that, right? And we're trying to make your coaching ability scalable to thousands of people, right? You have 250,000 people that can see your YouTube videos. We're trying to get so 250,000 people, if the market was that big, could get coached by you, right? And have it be your experiences, because you're going to resonate with certain people. Our other coaches are going to resonate with others. You know, you may be more of a slow twitcher, a fast twitcher, who knows, whatever. But there's like a good coach that you're compatible with is such an invaluable thing. And it's really cool. I didn't set that question up for you to hit a tracer ball off of it. You just happen to say like coaching is part of my future. And we're doing our best to try to build something that allows you to do that in a way that helps you financially. But it's not about just making sure Sage has a good financial future. It's also about, do the people who pay for it actually get what they pay for?
Yeah,
and do they get the value?
I really appreciate that. Like when Sandy and I started coaching, our motto has always been athlete empowerment, and the biggest limiting factor has been the time, because with like personalized individual coaching, you only have so much time to reach a few dozen people, let's say, and it's a higher price point. But with Tracer, you get all what we've learned over the decades combined of our running experience and coaching athletes at all levels, any service, any distance. And you're right, it could just scale. And that philosophy is embedded in the program. So I think it's a real great tool. And it's also capturing that technology and innovation. And, you and Jason are dreamers, and you've created something special and something unique. And Sandy and I are honored that you guys reached out to us as the first wave of coaches, and just being able to be involved is a big honor. But the bottom line is, trying to empower and reach more people so they could enjoy the sport of distance running as much as I have, because it's been a great sport and experience that makes people healthier. It makes you feel good mentally. It's empowering in a lot of different ways, and a really satisfying community too, to train with people or see people at other races and do these big challenges like ultra marathons. It's a great life accomplishment and something that's really beneficial to humanity, I think. So I think that's a great thing to get behind.
Absolutely. My father passed away on April 11th of this year. And a few days before he died, I went and visited him. He was getting closer and he was starting to, fade. And I went straight from his house up to Big Cottonwood Canyon here in Utah to one of my favorite backcountry ski spots. And I started going uphill, and I was going up, and I got way up there, I was a few thousand feet up on the mountainside there. It just started snowing so hard and blowing across my face, right? Like the wind, and I was in non-avalanche terrain, so I wasn't worried about it. But I was in this situation where I had this epiphany that my dad, because I learned that from my dad. My dad taught me how to ski and how to backcountry ski and how to navigate avalanche terrain or stay out of it. And I realized that I was going uphill in this blizzard and up in the mountain, and I was like totally relaxed, and I was just like having a great time. And I realized that 99.9% of the people would probably look at this situation and be like, I can't imagine anything more miserable, right? And there I was just enjoying myself, and I just continued uphill and skied. And I realized that was the gift that my dad had given me, right? That these sports can really change how we perceive challenge. And it's not the only way. Sandy pointed that out, and I think that's really important. Not everybody has to be an endurance athlete, right? But for us that love it, it really is a beautiful thing. So cool to hear your perspectives on it. Okay, let's call it. We could talk all day, but let's call it here. It's been so awesome to talk to you, Sage. Congratulations on so many awesome accomplishments. It's a privilege to have you and Sandy on Tracer in the higher running family. We got a long ways to go with Tracer, right? Like we're not even close to what we can do, and we just got to keep on that journey of growing and making the product better and a more personal experience, a better experience. We already feel like there's a lot of value there, but we're not going to stop. And I just want to highlight some of the takeaways that we've had from this conversation. You mentioned from just a training perspective, train your aerobic system year round, stick with that. And then when it's time to go specific, take a couple months to make that aerobic system point all of those things in the ways that you need them to, because that can be done in short amount of time. But what you can't fake is years of aerobic development. Another takeaway that I remember here is that like your first YouTube video was just you messing around. Like go have some fun with your life, do things that may not lead to success, do things. And it goes along with what we were saying about skiing, right? Go do things that maybe you're not good at yet. Because you give somebody long enough when they're not good at it, and all of a sudden they're like, wait, this guy's good at that. This girl's good at that, right? So that's another takeaway. It's just like, maybe don't worry so much if things are going to work or not, right? Like just do them anyway, publish them. And then the other takeaway would be publishing, right? Putting yourself out there, and what you put out there matters. And it matters negatively if you're caught up in vanity, if you're caught up in just things that cut people down or cut yourself down or bring other, if you want to spread hate, it works, right? And on the other hand, though, if you want to tell amazing stories and give people amazing, good information and truth and light, then that stuff matters, and publishing it matters. And you've done that. And so is your friends and some of the other people. They're sharing that light with us. And that's such an awesome thing that has created a relationship with you and me right here through those things. So many great takeaways. Awesome conversation. Congrats on everything. Let's keep rocking, Sage.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Okay. Take care.